We are live. Welcome to In Class with Dr. Gray, Carr with Carr. In Class with Carr. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in narrative in the world. We appreciate this. Yes. Yeah, we decided to do something a little different. Not a little different. Probably this is going to be the future because we need spaces that are safe, free from trolls, free from folk who shouldn't be here. I just wanted to see what it was all about. No, you need to be here to work. And if you are not part of this family, this growing family, then it's okay. It's all right.
That's all right. Come with us. Come with us. You must come with us. How you doing, Professor Hunter?
I am sweating because I was in the sauna before, so I'm still sweating from the inside. Because we're going to be talking about health today. So I just want to say thank you. And we have a special guest that will be joining us shortly.
Wonderful.
Yes,
wonderful.
Dr. Sunyada Amin is in the
Yes.
Because, as you guys know, we've been talking about this. You inspired me to think more deeply about things, to consider Souls of Black Folk, which we did. And those of you who haven't read it, it's in here in narrative. And the way we're going to be doing book clubs, again, we're jailbreaking the universities. We're also jailbreaking how we think about things. So normally we have a book club discussion. We read the book and then we go around and we talk about it, chit chat, blah, blah, blah. But to me, we got work to do. So our public domain work, like Souls of Black Folk, like the miseducation of the Negro, which we've also, we're doing annotating and having a discussion about, are going to be more workbook clubs. And then we're going to have book club, the traditional ones like Parables of the Talents and the Sowers, the Earthseed books by Octavia Butler. We're going to have a discussion around that. We're probably going to dive into some Toni Morrison at some point. We're going to probably do some, other kinds of books throughout the year. But Souls of Black Folk, I thought was a great entry point, especially when you said, Dr. Carr, that W.E.B. Du Bois had a 100-year plan that he wanted to do around 10 issues that impact Black America. And if we solve these issues, we solve our problems. And it's not about the government. It's not about, racism. It's things we can do. So I thought it would be very helpful today to, first of all, talk about W.B. Du Bois and start with health, because we're in the midst of a pandemic, whether it's going or coming or waxing or waning, whether you get vaccinated or not, that's your business. But this health crisis has really put a bullseye on Black people. We already knew that there was a problem. And we already knew that, from doctors not listening to us to, every category, we're in the top, high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease, it's like everything. And my question is, what can we do to solve it? And what have we done in the past through an external lens? And how did W.B. Du Bois think about health?
Wow. That's a fantastic. That's a fantastic set of questions and observations and trajectory we're on. So everybody here now live, we are in the space that we are building as we are freeing ourselves. We're in the narrative side. And so no less candid, no less us pouring clean glass of water, but this is the space that we control and have conversations in exclusively. It's very important. So for that, thank you. We started about 3 minutes after noon because I was on another call. So I want to mention, and there may be some folk who are there who will be coming over here because they are members of Narrative as well. But one of my Jegnas, our Jegnas, is his 79th birthday, Nate Norman, who for many years was a professor at Temple University, Fordham University, good brother out of West Tennessee. He is now on faculty at Morehouse College. So, we believe in giving our elders their flowers while they are on top of the earth, even as they become even more powerful when they become ancestors. And we got caught up in the conversation because this past week was also, they marked the ritual of transition into eternity for a brother who was on the faculty of Morehouse for about 60 years, Dr. Toby Johnson, was the first person of African descent to get a PhD in political science at Columbia, which is a signal landmark achievement in the social structure category, but nothing remarkable at all in the governance structure category, which is where we're going to spend most of our time today. So that's why we started a few minutes after I was finishing up, and I said, oh my God, I got the high sign from Professor Hunter. I said, hey man, I gotta go pull this ship. So they all told me, including Ajwa, who was one of his students when he was at Temple, Ajwa Batwe Asmoa, told me to tell you hello, Professor, and some of them will be coming over in a minute when they finish that call up. So I just wanted to say that. That's why we didn't start right at noon. Du Bois, Actually, let me tie that to Du Bois a little bit, because when, like I said, Pop Norman, as we call him, is in Atlanta. He and his wife got a house down there and called themselves going to retire. And that Negro waited about 2 weeks and snuck over to the Atlanta University Center and said, y'all need some teachers. And now he's directing the writing program at Morehouse. You know, black folk can't spell retire. Perhaps we should learn, but we haven't yet. That having been said, a brother who walked that campus for a number of years, the first time he came to the Atlanta University Center to work, in fact, at Atlanta University, he was 29 years old. He stayed there till he was 42, from 1897 to 1910. Is the brother we're going to talk about a little bit more this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are in the world. And that is, of course, William Edward Burghardt Du Bois. For those who have completed or have undertaken the work of going into Souls of Black Folk, and there's been a lot of very good feedback, and shout out to you, Reyes, shout out to the whole narrative team, Professor Hunter, shout out to you for creating a very interactive, very intuitive experience of reading. We know that reading cannot be displaced. It can't be, there's no substitute for it. It involves the development of the mind in ways that other things simply can't do. When my students say, well, Dr. Carr, we have to read this. Is there a video? And I say, even if there was, it wouldn't matter, because you've got to engage the words with your eyes and allow yourself, your imagination to develop. There's a very important process in that. But what we've done over here in narrative is we have combined that reading process with the discussion. So there is a bit of a classroom feel, and several people have, more than several, have remarked on that as you've gone through it. So if you have, you know, the biography, we won't get into that much today. I'll say just very quickly, born in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, February 23rd, 1868, 3 years, not even three, not quite three after the end of the U.S. Civil War, Dr. Du Bois would be. Raised by his mother, Mary. Father Alfred didn't know his father, but, you know, had a close-knit community there in Great Barrington, who we called the Black Burghardts. His mother made transition just as he was finishing up high school. He thought he was going to Harvard like the rest of the white boys. He was top of the class in his little town, but they was like, no, Negro, that's not for you. So he ended up getting 3 degrees from Harvard, a bachelor's, and then a master's and PhD. However, the first degree he got, the first college degree he got, was when they sent him to Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, where he fell in love with the idea of scholarship for the race. And he spent the rest of his life there. And over the arc of his long life, he did a number of things that you all can talk, you know, can review in the Souls of Black Folk conversation we had before making transition in Accra, Ghana, on August 22nd, 1963, literally the morning of what became the March on Washington. When you go back through the time zones, the day before the March on Washington, technically in Washington, D.C. So over the arc of that nearly century, 95 years, what Du Bois was able to do was in many ways chronicle the journey of African people, not just in the United States, but around the world in that century, almost century of life. And so we focused, as you say, on the Souls of Black Folk, which was written 60 years before he made transition, in some ways freezes Du Bois in time. We talked all about that. And so if folk in a minute want to offer some comments or questions about that as we get into the health piece, you know, as we get into conversation, you know, certainly that's welcome. But I think the Souls of Black Folk is something that is focused on more for what the United States is than it is for what Du Bois is and was. And let me set that aside for a second and get to the point. As I say, or re-emphasize the point, as I say, Dr. Norman, after leaving Philadelphia, New York, Philadelphia, taught City College for many years, then came to Temple. That's where I encountered him. He was on my dissertation committee, then retired, moved to Atlanta, went right over to the Atlanta University Center. He was following in the footsteps of Du Bois. And as we started, about 180 seconds past what we normally do at noon, if this had been Du Bois's classroom at Atlanta University when he joined the faculty of Atlanta University after being at Wilberforce, and then going to Philadelphia where he wrote the Philadelphia Negro, and then coming to the Atlanta University Center and taking this professorship in sociology at the Atlanta University in 1897, while he was still completing what would be published 2 years later as the Philadelphia Negro. If this had been us trying to get in Du Bois's classroom in 1897 or in 1898 or any time between 1897 and when he left to take over the Crisis magazine, found the Crisis magazine in 1910, as he was a founder of the NAACP, one of the founders. If we had tried to come in Dubois's classroom at Atlanta University 3 minutes late, in fact, 1 minute late, in fact, 30 seconds late, in fact, 2 seconds late, in fact, 1 second late, we would not have been able to get in. Because according to his students, several of whom were interviewed by David Levering Lewis for volume 1 of his 2-volume history of W.E.B. Du Bois, biography of Du Bois, he was able to talk to some of those elders before they made transition many years ago. And they said Dr. Du Bois would have his pocket watch on the podium. And as he began his lecture not just on the minute, but on the second, on the second that the clock hit. And at that second, the door was locked. And he didn't even listen to appeal. So if you knew you were going, oh, I can see the door. Yeah, but then boom, okay, I might as well just stop then because I can't get in. But that type of punctuality to the second marked the way that Du Bois saw the world. So what we're going to do today is spend a little time expanding that second, expanding it into the rhythms with which Du Bois viewed the African experiences that we now collectively call the Black experience in the 20th century. And with an eye toward the so-called 21st century, realizing that all these numbers are arbitrary and are marked by time and space that are set, in this case, by other people. We start talking about 21st, 22nd centuries. But at any rate, Du Bois, just as he clocked when he would start his lecture and lock that classroom door, had that classroom door locked, he also charted out his work projects. He charted out projects weeks at a time, months at a time, years at a time. He started doing this in his 20s. And we talked about that a little bit when we talked about Souls of Black Folk. He envisioned a social science project that is going to impact, that is impacting not only our conversation today, which will be the first of these conversations on a specific subject as it relates to Black people, but he envisioned solving problems using the intellectual work that he had developed as the finest social scientist of his time. Not just the finest Black social scientists, which is saying much because there was a lot of great Black social scientists, not a lot, but the ones who were trained were incredibly well trained. Everybody from Edward Franklin Frazier, Ira Reed, all these cats who worked with Du Bois or who sometimes argued with him, but who were trying to advance our people. But there wasn't a social scientist on the planet that was better than Du Bois. And so he charted this study of African people out, what he called Negro problems, beginning at Atlanta University. And so we're going to get into that next. Go ahead, Prof. Champion. Muted.
So because a lot of things going on. And again, you know, we are building this space and these are growing pains. It's a good problem. I think we crashed the server. So I'm going to open it up to YouTube in a second. But before we do, I want to have an internal conversation with whoever's here right now. We're going to open it up. But I think, you know, the work that needs to be done, and it needs to be, you know, we talk a lot. As people, we talk a lot about the things we want to do. We need to spend more time doing. I want to spend less time talking, more time doing. And if there's a blueprint, again, architects use blueprints to build. There are many, many blueprints. So let us follow the blueprints and let's not reinvent the wheel in this space. So today we're going to talk about healthcare. I want it to be a very pointed conversation about some of the things we can do. And then there's going to be a whole lesson taught by the great doctors, Sunyada, Amen. Yes. And we're going to have other doctors who are in administration and health, you know, because we have to start to build, I think, the Cuban model. And you and I had an off mic conversation, which we're going to have here.
We did.
And, you know, because I asked you, why is Cuba able to create this great healthcare? 90+% of the people are literate. Everybody has healthcare. They have this model that works, that they can send doctors throughout the diaspora, train folk for nearly nothing. Why are all my doctor friends saddled with $300,000 in debt?
Woo!
Why is that? And you said something profound. So I think we should say it here before we go live on YouTube.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, because as with narrative, you know, it's not about healthcare. It's about how you envision your society. And what Cuba is able to do, they're able to do because they have a governance structure that puts people at the center of society. And that is why whenever you see or hear the propaganda about what the Cubans are or aren't, and most people who are saying the Cubans, I don't want to be like Cuba, they're saying that because they don't know anything about Cuba. When people say that, what they're basically saying is that Cuba has been marked as an enemy of the United States. Why is that? Because Cuba puts people at the center of their society. That doesn't mean they do everything right. That doesn't mean there isn't racism. If you read Pinchon, which is Carlos Moore's biography of growing up Black in Cuba, you see that race problem is there. But one thing that is not there is capitalism, is profit at the center of the society. So that's why there are a lot of, as we talked about, Professor, I mean, that's why a lot of more and more medical students from the United States and other places are going to Cuba to be trained. And one of the things, if you're a Cuban trained doctor, you have to spend time in your career with your skills helping people who don't have access to healthcare. That's why they can export doctors, because if you came through a Cuban medical school, you're going to work in the countryside. You're going to work with people who don't have access. And you're not working in terms of trying to remedy something that has already occurred. You're doing preventative medicine. You're having wellness checks in old folks' homes. You're sitting there in the clinic as the babies get brought in, so you can check on them. I haven't seen you in a couple of weeks, and this is how you do it. And as you said, one of the people, we're in conversation with my dear friend Reba Kelsey, who is down at Atlanta in the Morehouse School of Medicine. She's saying, and who's traveled in East Africa, who's traveled in Haiti and other places, said this Cuban model really decenters profit. And that is why Cuba is such a threat, because if you decenter profit, it all blows up in your face, from pharmaceuticals to the debt incurred to get a degree. And now you wanted to work in the country clinic, but you're going to take this high profile job being a surgeon and doing this elective surgery because you've got $300,000 in debt. So, I mean, it isn't about the healthcare. It's about the profit. And that's the thing we can learn from Cuba. And as Dr. Amin is coming to join us, we understand wellness is at the center of health. And that's what Dubois and them, one of the things they were after when they talk about the Atlanta University studies. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today because we mapped it. I mapped all the healthcare out on our Africana Studies framework. So we can start it here. You want to, wait, again.
I keep muting myself because I'm getting 5011.
She's doing everything at once.
Bing, 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 bing. And it sounds like, a cash register going off every time somebody texts me about, not being able to get in or having, a slow server. And I want to invite Dr. Amin in because, she has all of the things. And I think about growing up, and you and I had a conversation yesterday. My dad, who I rest in power, love dearly. You hear the ding.
That's right. Everybody's definitely like, wait a minute, did the boat leave yet? We got to get on the ark. No,
okay. Let me just open it up really quickly and go live and public and publish. Boom. Now it's live. Hi, YouTube. How y'all doing? Welcome. We were having a conversation in narrative, but y'all crashed the site, and I'm not mad at that because that means we are.
No problem.
Means we got to, and I know we did the bandwidth thing, but that's neither here nor there.
That's all right. It's even more. That's beautiful.
I rebuke it in the name of Jesus.
In the name, covered with the blood. Now, come on now. See, hey, what y'all don't know is that's part of wellness in Black communities. It's just the physical, it's the spiritual. We rebuke that in the name. Look, you old folks, they're going to give you that little tea. Sunyada going to talk about it, but you know what they're going to do before they do that? They're going to pray to whoever they're praying to and put hands on you. So go on and rebuke it. It's rebuked.
You and I were having this conversation because, it hurts my heart that, Black people were so vulnerable to this virus. First we thought our melanin was going to protect us, and then we were dying in droves, primarily because of where we work and how we work, but also our underlying health conditions. And I'm like, is that something we can solve? And what, and as we look at the past and what we have done and how we got through 400 years of bondage here, all over the diaspora, we can do better. So if we can do better, we will do better. And I want to, again, lay the blueprint down so people can just follow it however, But my father was a very smart person who every day ate cheese, eggs with a lot of cheddar cheese and grits, and had his tea with the milk in it that had about 50,000 things of sugar. It was delicious, and he would have pork and beans and rice and veal cutlets with American cheese on it on Mondays. On Wednesday, Chinese food. He had his favorite was shrimp egg foo young with rice. I never saw anything green on his plate. And, he would say to me, you're going to have high blood pressure. My father had high blood pressure. My mother had your mother has it. You're going to have it. And I was like, no, I don't think I'm going to have high blood pressure because I think we can do it through diet. It's not necessarily heredity, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And now I'm more than 50 years old, Dr. Carr. Not only do I not have high blood pressure, my blood pressure is perfect. My cholesterol is 130 and I need to lose some weight, but I'm healthy. And, I look at taking things into your own hands, which all of us can do who are on this space right now.
That's
and if
right.
Du Bois, and you told me Du Bois highlighted health as one of the tenets. He had 10. We're probably going to do 5 in narrative because I don't know if I'm going to be here 100 years, but at least do 50. We could at least do 50 and get the ball rolling, and somebody else can pick up the baton. But what did Du Bois say about health?
Great question. Uh-oh.
What did you?
No, it's all good. No, we're here.
Don't you do it?
No, don't worry. It's rebuked. It's rebuked. And tell y'all folks, we're over on YouTube now, so everybody is here. For those of you who haven't not yet signed up for Narrative, please do that. We switched over to YouTube because, among other things, everybody who flooded in the Narrative side, everything works well. It's just that in a moment, the technology decided that they're going to try to throw us a curveball. But we're Black people. We hit the curve and the slider and the changeup and the fastball. So we're here. It's good to see everybody. Yeah, that's right. That's right. That was the ancestral connection. Dr. Du Bois, and it's important to note this. We always talk about individuals not being able to beat institutions. Remember, Du Bois was trained at a Black institution, Fisk. He was then trained at Harvard and then University of Berlin, 2 white institutions. And he was one of the finest, if not the finest, social scientists of his generation of any background. And when he came back to the United States, his only job offerings, in fact, the only potential for him to work, were not at the white schools, including Harvard and Berlin, 2 of the leading institutions in the world in European social structure, but Black ones. So he worked at Wilberforce University. He was offered to do a research study at the University of Pennsylvania. They wanted to take advantage of his first-rate skills to do a social study of Black people in the city of Philadelphia. And he couldn't even live on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania. He, his wife, Nina, and their daughter, their son, Burgard. They weren't even allowed to live on campus. And we don't want you Negroes on campus. We want your mind to study the social problem of your people over there in the 7th Ward in Philadelphia. And when they left there, they came to Atlanta University. Individuals don't beat institutions. It was when Du Bois came to Atlanta University that he inherited, as a professor of social studies, social sciences, sociologist in training, he inherited the leadership of a program that was actually started 2 years before he got there. It's called, they started something in 1895 called the Atlanta University Sociology Laboratory. That laboratory was set up based on something that Hampton and Tuskegee had begun at the early part of the decade of the 1890s, earlier in the 1890s. They had conferences on labor, education, and farming. This is during the period in the 1890s where the white folk in the, we're using our Africana Studies framework now, I'm going to put it very plainly. The problem we had in this country as African people in the United States, and there are people outside the United States, I'm going to connect that too in a minute, and then as Dr. Armand comes in a second. The social structure we faced in this country was, up until the end of enslavement, the only concern for Black health in this country, in terms of the collective of Black folk who were primarily enslaved in this country, was health in order to continue to be able to extract labor and the labor value from them. So when you read the book Birthing a Slave or Harriet Washington's work, Medical Apartheid, my friend Dorothy Roberts at the University of Pennsylvania, Killing the Black Body, this stuff has been well documented over the years. And then everything from experimentation on Black women, those plantation experiments, the so-called father of gynecology in Alabama, J. Marion Sims, operating on Black women without anesthesia, putting Black people in harm's way, whether it be the yellow fever epidemic of the 1790s, where you saw Richard Allen in them, 1780s, Richard Allen in them in Philadelphia. They're putting Black people out to help because there's a yellow fever epidemic, and they're going to make Black people expendable from Africans being depended on for their scientific knowledge. We know Cotton Mather depending on Onesimus, who introduced the concept, one of the people who introduced the concept of inoculation. We getting vaccines now. Go back to Onesimus and said, we've seen this smallpox business in West Africa, where I'm from. You take a little bit of it, introduce it to the person, they develop antibodies, and that's how, he's literally showing them how to do it. But all of this is based around the central theme, which is the labor of Black people. So you're only keeping them healthy so they can work. Well, after the Civil War, of course, the debate then ensues in the social structure. what do we do with these Negroes? We can't get rid of them. There are too many of them. So the HBCUs, people say, well, HBCUs were set up to educate Black folk. Yeah. And what they were teaching Black folk wasn't necessarily correlated to what Black folk needed. There were all kind of competing interests, and they weren't Black interests. They were white interests. You read James Anderson's book, The Education of Blacks in the South, a number of books, William Watkins, The White Architects of Black Education. And so by the 1890s, you had these debates, Cape and Springs, West Virginia, Lake Mohonk, New York. You know who's not there? Black folk. But you know who is there? White folk who are trying to control Black education. And by the 1890s, they said, we're going to have some conferences at Tuskegee, some conferences at Hampton, and we're going to build them around this idea of what we think Black folk need to be concentrating on. And what do we think they need to be concentrating on? Well, they need to concentrate on labor. We're going to train them to work. Education. So what kind of education do we want? And they primarily want teachers and preachers. I'll tell you right now, many of them, these people in social structure. And farming. Why? Because we need their agricultural labor. Enslavement is over, but the agricultural needs aren't. So this is when you see in the transition. Meanwhile, Black folk are like, yeah, we can use all that stuff, but we need to use it for our benefit. So you start seeing in the governance structure, when we start talking about healthcare, you're seeing African people during enslavement bringing their knowledge, their ways of knowing, which we'll get to in a second, with them on these boats. But the emphasis for African people has always been, regardless of the great variations of cultures, an emphasis on not just physical wellness, but mental wellness and social wellness. And Professor Hunter, you know, we're going to have a great conversation with Dr. Amin, who is essential in helping us, what she calls it decolonizing wellness. In other words, re-anchoring our healing, our question of health around the question of wellness. And so the role of the healer in terms of the governance structures of African people, very important. Spiritual traditions, herbalists like Dr. Amin, who's also an herbalist, preventative medicine versus corrective medicine. And self-care wasn't just about the individual, it was about the collective. And it was part of institution building. So coming out of enslavement you see Black folk who are now going to be asked to take over some of this taking care of Black bodies, have their own agenda. So as you see Meharry Medical College and hospitals started, when you see Howard University Hospital started, which was Freedman's Hospital before that, you're seeing Black people who are being trained, but who have their own ideas about what they're going to use those skills for. Now, let me move very quickly to the next category, because when Dubois shows up at Atlanta University in 1897, they've already had 2 years of conferences on what these Negro problems are, but they're based on Hampton and Tuskegee. In fact, let me just pause there because I want to go to the other categories, ways of knowing. In fact, I'll do that very quickly. This won't even be 60 seconds. In terms of ways of knowing, we understood when we came to this country and then preserved it during enslavement, the idea in terms of health, that tending to health was also part of one's total being. And that total being wasn't just the human being. We see that when Dubois, for example, gets to Atlanta University, who is one of his counterparts on the HBCU faculty not far from Atlanta in Tuskegee, Alabama? The great George Carver. George Washington Carver said, I listened to the plants. I talked to the plants. They told me what I could do. In fact, he's bringing a tradition, even though he's a trained scientist, he's bringing a tradition that this sister, Laudell Snow, in a book she published in the 80s called Walking Over Medicine, she said, you know, these Black people, you know what she did? She was at Michigan State at the time. She said, I sat in these clinics and I listened to these Black women and men. I listened to them talk about how they healed their children. I listened to what the doctors said. And then I listened to what these people said. And I realized how they view healing, how they view being able to use plants, how they use stuff in their yard to cure choleric, to come in and deal with people. And you know, Sunyada is going to talk about all this. So I'm just previewing in a little bit to say that George Washington Carver understood the value of being not just as a human, but as part of an ecosystem of natural life. And that is a way of knowing in terms of our Africana Studies framework that emerges out of African experiences we brought with us. Now, by the time Dubois gets to Atlanta University, in the social structure, they're looking at Black people as something that is going to affect their bottom line. By they, I mean the American capitalist system. How do we keep them healthy enough to work? How do we deal with the question of public health? I mean, are they sick? Are they going to get us sick? We're going to lose the workforce? And so the question of Negro problems as it relates to health was seen as a social dilemma. This is the same time that in terms of this, the next category, science and technology, When we start talking about the technology of medicine, Black folk aren't seeing doctors because there aren't Black doctors, not many, and the white doctors ain't seeing them. And so they're relying on these ways of knowing and their own technology that they developed, that they brought from Africa, adapted to the diaspora, and then continue to pursue the natural healing, the kind of behavior that goes along with that, that has a spiritual dimension and a physical dimension. But when Du Bois gets there, he says, okay, let's set the scene. He and Nina and Lil Burghardt get to Atlanta. It's 1897. Those studies have been going on at the Atlanta University Sociology Lab for a couple of years before that. And they recruit Du Bois, the best social scientist in the country, one of the best in the world. Set this up. And what do? Atlanta University becomes the first, and for many years, the only institution carrying out systematic studies of Africans in the United States and publishing the findings. So Du Bois brings the skills he developed as a social scientist in Nashville at Fisk, in Cambridge at Harvard, and then at University of Berlin. He brings those skills to this question. If I'm going to study Negro problems, how do I listen to Black people? So now what he's doing is he's taking the skills he's developed in a social structure that is really anti-Black, and he's applying them in a governance structure. In other words, who are we to each other? So let me start asking. And so let me just read to you from the autobiography of W.E.B. Du Bois how he set it up. And this is where we get to these categories, which don't necessarily, some of them overlap, but he comes to this. He says, well, I'll paraphrase and I'll get to the direct quote. When he gets there in 1897, they've already published the first study in 1896. That study was called Morality Among Negroes in Cities. Mortality, not morality, mortality. So Black folk have moved to the cities during enslavement, after enslavement. Then you see this explosion in particularly the urban South, Tallahassee, Nashville, places like that, New Orleans. He said they're in the poor part of town. The social conditions are terrible. Economic conditions are terrible. They had the worst food because, as you just said, Professor Hunter, what we find is that our health is really about our lifestyle. It's not genetics, because they're going to get in this whole genetics war too. And that's the story for maybe another day as we build this out on the narrative side. But so the first study they do is, why are these Black people sick and dying? So they develop a little survey research. Du Bois comes and says, I'm rewriting all this. The year he gets there, the Atlanta University studies engaged in 1897 in something called the social and physical condition of Negroes in cities. So they're coming back to that. Why? Because in the social structure, they want this labor in the cities. They also want the labor on the farms, but the people in the cities haven't yet adopted, and the cities are exploding, and this Black population, as it is now, often in the worst parts of town, and it's affecting their health, clean drinking water, the ability to have edible food and healthy food, right? Because they're not on the farm anymore. These kind of things Atlanta University study are up in gear. So then Du Bois says this. They give him a budget, basically. Well, let me just say. He says in the autobiography, this published just after he made transition. He says the proverbial visitor from Mars would have assumed as elemental a study in America or American Negroes as physical specimens, as biological growth, as a field of investigation and economic development from slave to free labor, as a psychological laboratory and human reaction toward caste and discrimination, as a unique case of physical and cultural intermingling. These and a dozen other subjects of scientific interest would have struck the man from Mars as eager lines of investigation for American social scientists. He would have been astounded to learn. In other words, somebody coming from another planet would have said, surely you've studied everything about these people because they're human in the world, but that person from another planet would have found out very quickly, no. To quote Sylvia Winter again, there are no humans involved. We don't need to know anything about these people except how to keep them working. So he says, the man from Mars would have been astounded to learn that the only institution in America in 1900 with any such program of study was Atlanta University, where on a budget of $5,000 a year, including salaries, cost of publication, investigation, and annual meetings. In other words, nothing. This is what he built these studies on. We were essaying this pioneering work. My program for the succession of conference studies was modified by many considerations: cost, availability of suitable data, tested methods of investigation. Moreover, I could not plunge too soon into the controversial subjects like politics or miscegenation within these limitations. He is the best trained social scientist in the country. He's at a Black school, which he says ain't really a university. He's got these students he's got to teach. They give him a shoestring budget and they say, make this. And he determines what you're about to hear next. Within these limitations, I finished a 10-year cycle of study as follows. 1896, morality among Negroes in cities. So he goes back into that one that preceded him and said, let me look at this. 1897, social and physical condition of Negroes in cities. Again, one that's being completed as he shows up. 1898, the first one when he's been there, right? Some efforts of Negroes for social betterment. So that one is going to be everything from political stuff to institution building, all this work. 1899, the Negro in business. 1900, the college-bred Negro education. And then in 1901, the Negro Common School, now K-12. He did university education the year before. 1902, the Negro Artisan. Now he's talking about Black folks in the professions. 1903, the Negro Church. 1904, Notes on Negro Crime. 1905, a select bibliography of the American Negro. He said, I then essayed for the second decade a broader program, more logical, more inclusive, designed to bring the whole subject matter into a better integrated whole. But continued lack of funds and outside diversions kept even the second decade from the complete logic of arrangement which I had desired. Finally, my leaving Atlanta in 1910, and at last, the severing of my connection from the conference in 1914, left the full form of my program still unfinished. I did, however, publish the following 8 studies. I won't read all 8. I'll stop with the first one because this is the one we're talking about today, 1906, Health and Physique of the Negro American. Then he gets into Negro co-ops. He starts talking about the family, social betterment. I mean, the only ones that got redone, because this is what he said, after we finish our 10th year, we're going to go back to our first topic. And health was built into those first 3, by the way. And then we're going to see how much progress we made. 1898, some efforts of Negroes toward their own social advancement, a 9-city sociological study with mostly undergraduate students, a few graduate students and his friends in other cities, places like Washington, D.C. They redid that one in 1909. So he was able to get a couple. The Negro Artisan, 1902, they redid that one in 1912. But that health one was the first of that last group of pieces he put together. And then from that point of departure, we have our framework for beginning to see how we can remix and attack these broad issues that Du Bois had mapped out.
I wanted to start with health because that's something that everybody can do something about and do something towards. So I want to welcome in Dr. Sunyada Amin, who you introduced me to, who has been on my radio show and has transformed so many lives. And a medical doctor, you know, medically trained, but understands 5 generations of healing is in her blood. So we welcome her in, and I thank you, Dr. Sunyada Amin. Unmute. Welcome.
How are you?
Hey.
Good. Welcome. I've been taking in all this information. I'm so happy to be here. This is fantastic, of course.
Yes, we're glad to have you. We are glad to have you.
You're the best. Make my whole Saturday every Saturday.
No. Look, you about to make not only our Saturday today, but you're gonna make sure, listening to you and following what you're about to say, you're gonna make sure that so many of us have more Saturdays to enjoy each other. So please.
I certainly hope so. Let me get my little screen together. Yeah, I certainly hope so. That is pivotal and germane. Thank you for having me again. You know, in the course of what you were saying, Dr. Carr, about the health and physique of the Negro, and that being really what was germane to oppressors, let's just say enslavers, during slavery and after it, because, you know, what are you going to do with these people? And then if we're needed for physical labor during the time that slavery is taking place, and then we're needed for physical labor after that, and then we're also not intended as a group of people to draw resources by becoming ill, because then what happens? And this goes back to your conversation at the beginning about the difference in Cuba's healthcare system. And when a set of doctors is sent to school, not just doctors, all kinds of healthcare professionals, and there is no fee involved for the medical education itself. And the whole idea is acts of service is how you return those fees, then this completely changes the way medicine is approached. So let's just go, we'll begin at the beginning in a way, or at least the beginning of our experiences as people of color more modernly, let's say that, so we cover everybody's understanding, more modernly in the aspect of transatlantic slavery. And the very first place we have to start, especially when we start talking about how people were brought to the Caribbean, and then dispersed from there in a lot of cases, so Charleston or there, is that we owe it to ourselves to understand that our relationships with food and drink, our relationships with agriculture in general, and that those relationships have been dictated for us as indigenous people, because most of us have indigenous Native American blood running through our veins, that was interblended with the people who were forcibly kidnapped and brought here. So what we have is this amalgam of people removed from land and then placed on land. And the whole purpose of that was to farm food. So Europe's taste for chocolate, sugar, mangoes, bananas, coffee, you name it, tobacco, citrus, all of it was at the heart of this forcible, terrible, horrible experiment in free labor and that golden triangle. And in that, we had so much enslavement revolving. Let's just take one thing that Professor Hunter was talking about in terms of our relationship with diabetes and sugar in general. And think about the fact that we were enslaved principally for Europe's taste for sugar for hundreds of years, and we're still enslaved to sugar because of our relationships with sugar now. It begs our conversations about what are our comfort foods and why are those foods of trauma still our comfort foods. And that includes the things we created in the process of scraps from other people to try to make foods for ourselves and survive. And no one's blaming ancestors for making that happen. I mean, God bless them. They got us here. That's how we got over.
Okay.
Now, where do we go from this point? So let's say as an example, Dr. Carr, when you were talking about the setup of HBCUs and how they originally founded on teaching agricultural science or keeping us in those realms. Think about just our modern food, like chocolate, and how our relationship with chocolate is so deep. And European companies are famous, the Swiss chocolate and the Dutch cocoa and even the one, you got one in the cabinet, some of us, it says Swiss Miss. This is not anything that comes from these places. And our relationship, I use chocolate specifically because chocolate depends upon other forms of agricultural slavery and oppression. So milk chocolate, that's what most of us are eating, relies on vanilla and sugar and cacao, right? And it also relies on cocoa butter, and it also so there's all these emulsifiers, there's all this stuff that really is farmed in tropical places that make that one product that has made so many people rich. I mean, Nestle's is the largest conglomerate in the world. It rivals Coca-Cola. I think it may even be bigger than. They have their hands in so much food all over the world and other industries. And this has been built on the backs of slave labor, and our relationship to those plants has to be examined by ourselves, because these are our medicines. And now there are poisons in a lot of ways too.
So part of this process in narrative and, in class with Carr is for us to remember who we were. He always, takes us back. This is through the lens. It doesn't start with slavery. How were Africans healing themselves? Got here? Like, what were we eating? What got us, through? And again, we were doing so much more actively. We're much more active than we were. But what were we eating? What sustained us?
That's a great question. One of my favorite foods to even have conversation about is the staple of yams. The fact that this was many of these African yams that came with us, some of the cassavas and taros and other foods were brought with us in that travel from West Africa. A lot of those roots came from other places, much like the hibiscus that we come to love as sorrel in the Caribbean, and the Otaheite apple, which is red and very large, but it looks more like a pear, that kind of thing, is actually from Tahiti. That's why it's called Otaheite, which is the Tahitian name for their place. Lots of these things came after Cook, and lots of these folks went to these British and Irish and European captains went to South Pacific and brought those things over. And then you have the intermingling of those things with the people that were then brought from West Africa. So yams of all natures tend to be one of our staple foods. And even the word yam is a borrowed word from West African traditions, specifically like in Ghana and other places. You will call to eat nyam, like to eat something. And even in Jamaica still, we say, oh, you nyam off everything in the fridge. Why you nyamming so much? And it's like, it's usually like a jokey kind of criticism that somebody, yam, somebody with yam. And it really means to eat. And so imagine how important this healing food, this sustenance is to us, that the verb to eat and the thing itself are the same thing. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it traveled on these ships with us in many cases right alongside us, and it was seen as a cheap, inexpensive, easily reproducible food for enslaved people in the Americas. Well, we do what we do. We freak it, we flip it, we reverse it, we make it into all kinds of things that are actually great and delicious for us. And the truth is that was one of our staple foods that also is medicinal because it contains lots of ingredients that assist us. And in fact, there's been a new study that talked about Jamaican athletes, because I think everybody here may be aware that Jamaican Olympians are famous all over the world. Even when you see a Canadian sprinter, a British sprinter, American sprinter, when you check their parents are Jamaican. And it's interesting because what is being said is that the yams, like they used Usain Bolt as a model for that. And the fact that those yams where he's from, specifically in Trelawney in Jamaica, which was a huge area of Maroon colonization too, that actually makes muscles rebound faster in athletic performance. So these foods that we were sort of trapped with became the foods that we used for our own levels of healing. And when we talk about the Maroons, which I know is one of your favorite topics, Dr. Carr.
Rocking that sweatshirt last week. Everybody wanted to know. Thank you for sending it to me.
That's my friend makes those sweatshirts. The t-shirts, they are fabulous. We got to get them in the narrative.
No question. I think a lot of people probably bought them from last week because I was rocking, and it was like Karen was like, "Where are these people?" No, but anyway,
just on the t-shirt front, when Dr. Amin was on my radio show on Sirius XM, she said something. It was on the anniversary of Malcolm X, which previously we already talked about on Saturday. Mm-hmm. And she said, when you replace I with we, can you repeat that, Dr. Amin? Can you just, because this is the foundation of everything that we're doing here.
Absolutely. This is a quote attributed to Brother Malcolm. I have never heard it spoken by him, but it definitely sounds like something he would say. And because of his turn of phrase, his use of language, and such a beautiful orator. And in addition to that, there's the tradition we have as Native people called hadith, right? Like you can attribute a quote to someone who's an ancestor if it's uplifting. But I've heard this many times since childhood, that when we replace I with we change illness to wellness. And this is pivotal in our understanding of healing. A healing journey, is only as good as we are. So even when you're saying, okay, well, what can we do? It's not what can I do, it's what can we do? Many of us have tried to become a vegetarian or eat better, or what. You're only as good as the people who live in your house, who eat in your refrigerator. You know, you'll get sunk immediately if you go and have your grandmother's, you know, hog maws, and, you know, whatever it is that you associate with your childhood foods or people are eating around you. So you're only as good as your social set. So it's great that we're together because we can encourage each other in those directions to examine our relationships with these foods and agricultural products that may have been forced on us. And we now have to step back and say, wait a minute. We already paid that price. We already farmed that thing. We already gave our lives to cotton. We gave our lives to sugar. Should we be drinking this much alcohol? We've already farmed these things. Now we need to kind of just step back and take a look.
So go ahead, Prof.
No. I was just going to say, first of all, the T-shirt and hoodies with that saying from Malcolm will be available in narrative.
Yes.
Right now. Yeah. Available right now.
We're talking about
hoodie with that on it. But you know, as we continue this, because this is the process, is that, you know, a lot of folk are looking, you know, I want a solution now. You're not going to lose 50 pounds tomorrow. And you didn't get to a place of high blood pressure. You weren't born with it, unless you were, and then that's something else. You weren't born with diabetes. You weren't born with these illnesses. This has happened over time and generationally because we eat what our parents ate, what our grandparents ate. And now it's time to, as you said, reverse it. So I want to pop out with that. But go ahead, Dr. Carr.
No, not at all. This is very important. I mean, Dr. Almond, help us. And for folks who are listening to understand, as we just heard Professor Hunter say, these things take time. You were about to help us understand through the experience in Jamaica, through diet, the importance of diet and community. That's one of the things we were talking about. In a minute, we talk about how Black people came out of enslavement in the United States. You know, that first and second wave of medical doctors really are attempting to grapple with how to heal our people. But what you just said becomes the framework. In other words, this isn't about individuals trying to maintain health or correct. This is about communities. And so the last thing I'll say, and I really hope, you know, continue to help us understand how diet works in relation to community and ways of knowing in our culture. I'm thinking about a figure like Montague Cobb, Dr. Cobb. Montague Cobb, who, you know, is from DC, went to Amherst College, got a medical degree and a PhD in anthropology. First Black person to get a PhD in anthropology, in fact, who spent his life in Washington, DC as a medical doctor and then on the faculty of Howard for almost 50 years, grappling with the idea that people wanted to say, well, race is real. White people, Black people are just different genetically. And Cobb spent his life saying, nah, this is not genes. This is behavior. This is social context. This is what you put in your body, what you have to put in your body, how the society forms around you. So before you start saying that these people are like this because they came out of the womb that way, slow down to understand that human beings are built. And the built environment, once you're born, has everything to do with where you're born, what you can eat, what people's values are. So you were about to take us through some of that as it relates to Maroon culture. I mean, hope you'll continue.
Yes, of course. And I want to challenge everyone who's listening to this, that every time Dr. Carr or I say Maroon, you take a drink of water. You'll be very hydrated at the end of this. Maroons.
That's right. Much clearer, no question. I had to go out and get that shot, Doc. I had to go get my.
We're going to do it together. It's we. It's wellness, right? Yeah, it's not I. Yeah. So
we had to finish this extension of you. We had to get that shot, and you told us to go ahead and get it because some things you just got to do, even as you're on your way to wellness, right? But anyway,
you got to do it. This is part of the journey. So if we just look at the Maroons as an example of our relationship to foods and our separation from colonization and the colonization of our tongues, because that's one of the things that I feel like is really super important, is that being in this culture has taught us modernly, right? We've been doing this for quite a while, is that we know that Europe's taste for sugar and certain spices and things that were very sweet drew their interest to how to get free labor to do this work and to put sugar in tea and have tea itself. We know there were whole revolutions fought around the world about tea, even in this country, that there are agricultural products at the base of these wars. So with regard to the Maroons, one of the lessons we can learn from Maroonage, from people who forcibly took their freedom from the hands of enslavers and decided to live in colonies. And the word maroon comes from cimarrones, which is the wild ones, the untamable ones. I'm a descendant of Maroons from Jamaica, and the conversations that are in these Maroon colonies are fascinating around health, because there's a general distrust of Western medicine, Western food. You're not going to see any meringues. You're not going to see a whole lot of ice cream. You're not going to see, there's just a general distrust that permeates, because those foods are associated with our enslavement. So we're careful about sugar. We're careful about salt, usually only using the seaweed or using the salt that's already in the vegetable. And so the entire species, let's call it, the subset of culture that is married very much to Rastafarian culture, gave birth to this more vegetarian concept, the more this ital food, this idea of eating from nature and using herbs and continuing that, because that's where our freedom came. When we look at Queen Nanny and we look at Dati Bokman and Makandal in Haiti, when we look at these revolutionaries who forced the Europeans, and we're going back to 16 and 1700s, when we look at how they forced these Europeans to sit at the table and sign treaties because they were just so fierce, these fighters, the basis of their fighting was based in African spiritual and healing traditions. They say that Makandal and Nani and Dati Bukman all knew spiritual ways, traditional African spiritual ways, and they also had a high understanding of herbs. And those things were used to both poison slave owners and take our freedom, and also heal the people that had been injured in trauma, in the trauma of slavery on a variety of levels, mind, body, or spirit. So we have a relationship with nature that got interrupted in a lot of ways. But then again, we held on to a lot of those things. Our understanding of our connection is indelible. I mean, when you're from the Caribbean, and some people who are listening to this who may be Caribbean may know that if someone is asking you, especially an old time person is asking you where you're from, they'll say, "Where's your navel string buried?" Meaning, where is your umbilical cord, like your placenta, buried? And what that means is that when you're born in these communities in parts of the Caribbean and Africa and Central America, the placenta, the afterbirth that comes after you, a tree is always planted on top of that. There's a hole that's dug, a tree is planted, and you and that tree are friends. They call that your tree friend. And that you are always connected to that place. There's no disconnection from the land itself. If there's already a tree there, they'll dig a hole and put it next to the tree. There's a relationship we have with plants that is psycho-spiritual and physical. And we need to just move back to that just a bit. Right, slide on back just to that. And the plant is what gets you lined back up with the divine. The plant will help you. It's an interconnector.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny you said it, because when we were every time we go to South Africa, it's exactly what you said. Winnie Mandela, as you said, the navel string, as you said, they're buried there at that tree in the yard of the house where she had her children with Winnie Mandela and Nelson Mandela. It's right there. And a lot of times when you're there, of course, folks are saying, "Oh, that's interesting," but you hear a very different, you hear with a different set of ears when you realize that African people preserved that ability, and not only preserve that ability, preserve that practice. What does that say about how we view our children in terms of even how we teach our young people how to maintain wellness? Is part of it by helping them understand to be connected to the ecosystem, connected to nature? I mean, how does that relate to things like play, for example, to the types of games we develop? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I mean, I grew up in two places that couldn't be any more different. Two islands. I grew up on Manhattan and Jamaica. Simultaneously going back and forth with my parents and grandparents, et cetera. They couldn't be any different. And I thank my lucky stars. It gives you a little divergency. You kind of, there's a dichotomy, but being able to see places where children are playing with Mattel dolls or, whatever, right? Like the Barbies that are forced on us with the unrealistic body shapes and the skin colors and all of that. And then when you go to Jamaica, our toy was the mango seed. I mean, literally the seed, like it has its own hair. So once you eat the mango, you're like brushing the hair like it's a baby doll. You're putting little eyes on it. You're playing with the coconut shell. You get ackies, there's the seed, you're shooting them across the thing like marbles. There's a completely different, conversation about plants and interactivity. You have play chasing the lizard. You just have different games, and that allows us to be connected into nature. The minute you're in a concrete jungle, you're in an area where I struggled sometimes to find a tree growing up in indigenous spiritual traditions like Santeria, et cetera. Like you have to go outside and pour libations. Sometimes I couldn't find a tree for like 3 blocks that I could pour on in New York. And that just shows you how much disconnection there is. In addition, right, our heredity, as Professor Hunter was saying, like we say, well, I have high blood pressure, that's hereditary, or diabetes, or now there are genetic predispositions to things, but then it begs like the chicken or the egg, right? Because now scientists are starting to see that genes can be shifted. So if you have trauma, it can shift your genes, like damage your DNA. So does that mean that, our forced interrelationship with these foods that we're also farming or that we have to eat because it's what we have available, then creates a shift in our genetics that predisposes us to not have a tolerance for certain things. Also, the food is hereditary. If you're going to eat mac and cheese, or you're going to eat this, or you're going to eat, and I'm not saying, who doesn't love mac and cheese? It's amazingly delicious. But we can learn to make these things in a healthier fashion. So I'm not one of those do without people. I'm like, well, let's see how we can freak it and still eat it and understand the history of it. I mean, we wouldn't have mac and cheese in this country if it weren't for a Black man, right? Thomas Jefferson's executive chef James Hemings brought that food, and there's several foods that he made possible in the Americas, and he's a forgotten figure in culinary art. And this is the brother of Sally Hemings, right? This is the brother of the girl, I can't even call her a woman, that Thomas Jefferson was having children with, and he freed this man, did not free Sally Hemings, by the way. And imagine just the trauma of how we relate to food, how James Hemings was feeding heads of state, presidents from other countries, prime ministers, whatever, were eating his food, and yet his sister was in the back house, enslaved, having children with that. I mean, our relationships with things are very, very pivotal. When I see people in the chat talking about their blood pressure and how is that related to dietary issues? Is it hereditary? I say that it's both. Both things can be true. Both things can be true. We have higher aspects of diabetes because we have trauma, and then we eat based on feeling better about the traumas that we've been sustained, like the traumatic syndromes, right? But then also that shifts your DNA. I mean, both things can be true.
Didn't the high blood pressure help us stay in this? Didn't the blood pressure and some of those illnesses that we now are suffering with help us stay out in the field longer and give us the ability to be able to work the way we were working without the nutrition that we needed.
Absolutely. That's a great point. We have to think about the intense levels of heat, this very hard work. Look, go outside now and go, like Professor Hunter was saying, just go run around the block 3 times and come back. It'll change your life.
Right.
You start to question your commitment to the project. It's a lot, right? And imagine these people are doing this labor. Think about the fact that let's use chocolate as an example, that our relationship with chocolate began with modern milk chocolate began in Jamaica. And the reason that happened is because the governor of Jamaica, that the British had appointed an Irish physician that they appointed as the governor of Jamaica, who was an alcoholic, by the way. And he found that the slaves were in poor health, that the maternal birth rate was like a third, like 33% or so of the children being born to these slave women were dying. And he discovered that giving us chocolate with milk and sugar as a drink was restorative. So this helped the mortality rate go down, so that there would be more people, of course, to do this very difficult labor.
Exactly.
So in the process of this, you got to think, what does our relationship with sugar and milk and chocolate and sweet things become when we associate that with restorative function and the lack of death of our children, because we need this in order to survive? Then we start to see, then you get Cadbury, the big British brand, bought his formula. And so there's still brands that exist that are capitalizing on our injuries, and that our diabetes is connected. You still have tons of people in Europe, Black folk, addicted to Cadbury, just like Hershey's chocolate or whatever. And we have to ask, where does that start?
That's right.
I think it's profound that the thing that enslaved us is still enslaving us. When you said that shook me. So again, let's go back, through our Africana lens. You said we ate yams.
Yeah.
Somebody's asking about the pyramid, like that. What should we be eating now? And how do we break the chain of the addictions that we have? Because they're addictive, right? These foods, the salt, the sweet, all of that, the chocolate, they have properties in it that give us joy. It sets off hormones and all kinds of things. How do we break ourselves? How do we break the chain?
I would say simply that it's replacing it. Going cold turkey on things is difficult. It's really difficult, and it's a good way to slip, slide, backslide, right back down. So just replacing things. You usually use salted pork in collard greens. We're just going to use that as an example. Then you're going to step forward to, okay, let me show you how to put some liquid smoke and to use some jerk seasoning and other things that are going to give you a flavor that you want, because we love flavor. We invented flavor. Okay. We're all about flavor. So if it doesn't taste good, we're not going to eat it. So the key is to make analogous foods that taste great. Introduce more vegetables. I heard Professor Hunter talking about, was it your dad that just didn't have anything green or any vegetables on his plate? And
he would say he's an original Negro, so he can. He really believed that nothing could affect him. He never had a cold.
Indestructible.
When he got sick was with cancer. So you think about, like appendix. This is how bad he was. You imagine how much pain you have to be in for your appendix to burst. He refused to go to the hospital. He didn't trust doctors. So, I was surprised he lived as long as he did, considering all of the things that, because he felt like he could not be stopped because he was an original Negro. That said, I think a lot of Black people have this, complex that we are unstoppable until we're stopped.
Oh, yeah.
Something.
Yeah.
It's still there. Even with COVID, other stuff too. We're just we're built different. We're set up different. And that, to be honest, is neither here nor there on COVID, but that's because we've had to be indestructible for so long that if we got tired, I ain't tired yet. It's like, if you get tired, you will die. There is always the threat of this person's not working fast enough. They're tired. Is it time to literally put them out to pasture? Because our out to pasture meant you're not going to be on that payroll of that plantation. Plantocracies revolve around that.
That's right. You're obsolete. You're out. So, the question of replacement that you're bringing up is fascinating because is it your sense and experience that just about everything can be replaced? I'm thinking, for example, about one of those sugar-related byproducts. I don't know if it's correct to call it, and correct me if I'm wrong, sugar pot liquor, which we might refer to as alcohol, rum, for example. Right. Somebody out there is like, well, how do I replace rum? Are some things that we just probably need to wean ourselves off completely, or is there a continuum? Could you help us understand? This replacement concept is very powerful.
Yeah, well, here's what I love is the conversations we're having here, because the minute these thinking people who are listening to this, because these are all incredibly bright people listening to this, I want them to feel this in their heart, that the minute you hear that transatlantic slavery's foundation was sugar, and the rum is the next product of that sugar, and you see your ancestors being loaded onto boats, brought to a place, half of them didn't survive, they're being beaten down and forced to farm this thing, and still farming it, okay, for pennies. It may start to shift your thought of Captain Morgan was here. That kind of bleep bothers me when an entire rum campaign is revolving around people who stole other people, pirate ship slavers, and people who raped and pillaged villages. Captain Morgan was notorious. So we have a whole rum we're drinking. Is that right? So the minute that we start thinking about our relationships to being enslaved by these foods, we start to think about, wait a minute, because look, growing up in New York at the time that I did, and at the birth of hip hop, there's so much of that was governed by food. So many messages entered our consciousness through, whether it was a Nation of Islam, whether it was, there's no swining and dining, there's no this, don't eat that. Oh, the white man wants you to eat, it's Murder King, it's Crack Donald's, it's, there was so much positive social pressure on knowledge of self. So that when you got knowledge of self, you had to change your food, because if you were out in the street eating something crazy and your man's roll up, you'd be like, what's that? Like, you'd get called out. That's right. And so in this case, we have to call ourselves out, like, hold on a minute with the alcohol. Give me a minute.
You are saying something right now, because we were wearing, not even, it was that era, the black medallions. We weren't over commercialized. We weren't wearing jewelry. We weren't killing each other with sneakers. And then something happened. And it's something that Dr. Carr and I talked about with Cuba, because you said as soon as black people start going to Cuba to get trained, Cuba's done. You said that. And I think it's interesting that all of a sudden this commercial, we forgot, we having whole ass conversations about Popeye's chicken. We made them $1 billion during the pandemic, or right before the pandemic, over some damn chicken that I'm not even sure is chicken.
Is it chicken though?
I don't know if it's chicken.
I love what you said. The minute capitalism enters the conversation,
come on now,
it changes everything. And when we think about the fact that the whole way we got here as enslaved people, and as people indigenous folks whose land we lost because of these plantocracies, right? We start to see things differently. We're not following Meghan Markle and the gang and trying to see what they're up to. And, because those are the same people who made that money off of, okay, so let's just be clear. Let's be clear. And when we start to do that, we see that our ancestors, almost every single Maroon, right? Almost every single Maroon rebellion began with the burning of fields. Ooh. Burning of fields was the first thing that happened, because you're not gonna force me to work here. I don't work here no more. I don't even go here. And neither do you. If I burn this, we're done.
Done. That is remarkable.
So wait,
how
what's the modern day equivalent of burning the fields? What's the modern day equivalent of that?
I love it you said that. So our modern day equivalent, take yourself to your refrigerator
here we go.
and your cabinets and start doing a clean out. Start doing the research you would do on these books. Start looking at these companies. Del Monte, Oh, Beatrice Foods, okay. Oh, Nestle's, Quick, and the this and that. Oh, word. These people are still enslaving folks. They're still built. There's a few generations out from, the Dole pineapple. You see Dole bananas and Dole pineapples. These are things that were and are still being slaved over. We have to shift. And knowledge of self is the first thing. So burning cane fields modernly means that we are in community of wellness. When a cane field was being burned or any other plantation crop, cotton fields, whatever it was, one person didn't do that. That was an agreement.
That's right.
We had an agreement. That was a solemn oath, and we had the permission of the ancestors on whose shoulders we stand. And we said, you know what? We're asking for permission to do this. We went to the elders in our village. They said, yes, we did this, and we converged as community. So right here is our community. We're going to give each other permission to step outside of colonization, including our tongues. Not everything has to be sweet or salty, sweet or salty, sweet or salty. We need some earthy. We need some peppers. We need some umami. We need some bitters. In Jamaica, we even have a drink just called bitters. We just take, and your grandparents put it on, they'll put it on you if you stand still long enough. You just get bitters. Everybody lines up and they got to get a shot of bitters.
Lord have mercy. That's right. That's right. That's what we used to. Actually, we were talking about this, and I'm thinking about all the rebellions. Stono in South Carolina, Pointe Coupé in Louisiana. They burned the fields. And so, how do we? There's a lot of young people who watch this, obviously, and at various stages. There are some young people who want to go to medical school. Could you share some insight of how you walk in all those worlds at the same time? Because you walked in all those different worlds. They want to know how do I sign up? Because I'm going into this to be a healer, but I know I'm about to confront a system that is not about healing at all. What word do you have for them?
Well, it's interesting, and this is why these spaces are necessary, because our and this gets back to Dubois, right? Our validation, our personal validation and community of larger white institutions or those mimicking those institutions has got to be questioned, because you can't have a Harvard or a Yale or a Brown or Princeton or anything without slavery. They literally own slaves that they sold to finance the institution. And then we anticipate, they got into Harvard, they got into Yale. And then our institutions mimic those same structures. Right. We have to think, I'm not saying anybody shouldn't go to a school if that's, of that nature, if that's what they want to do. Be prepared.
Yes.
That imperialism protects itself. Okay.
Hold on, wait a minute. That may be another T-shirt slogan. Go ahead. One more time. Imperialism
protects itself.
Imperialism.
It insulates itself. And the way that you can see that is, 90% of your American presidents have graduated from those 4 schools. Like everybody came through the same university. How is that possible?
How about that?
How is that even possible?
It's funny you said it, because my Dr. Cobb said when he left Dunbar High School in DC and went to Amherst, and then Charles Drew was in the class behind him. All these guys go from DC to Amherst. He said, I got there and I realized these white boys are not even smart. And that's when I started to question race. And as you said it, I'm thinking about Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley. This is Harvard and Yale. And you understand that these institutions aren't built around human development. They're about a brand, and they're imperialism protecting itself. This is
so if somebody's interested in learning traditional, and when I say traditional, I mean our indigenous, African, Asian, Native American traditions of medicine, which are psycho-spiritual, by the way, psycho-spiritual, physical. There's no way to separate any of those things. we have to go to elders. There's almost no other way to do it. And when an elder dies, a whole library burns to the ground. So if you don't get the information, then it's your fault. Hanging out with people who look just like you is not going to cut it. You got to go to some elders and sit at the feet and say, you know what? I need you to tell me what you know about this. And that's what I had to come to as a young person, was to release my resentment about being held in the kitchen and learning things. And I'm like, this is bullshit, man.
Yeah.
Like, I'm learning to make rice, or I'm learning these herbs, or I'm like, oh my God. And my American friends are outside playing. And I'm like, what is this? And now I understand that I was being taught, I was being passed down traditions that I still use.
Yeah.
And now everybody, all the people, come to our place to get that level of information because they don't have it. So let me give you a quick story. When I was in undergrad, I remember I had a professor who was a cardiologist by training. And we were having a conversation in the class, and he's like, well, what are some of the ways you can bring down blood pressure or vasodilate open blood vessels? And, what can you give people to do that? And I was like, and he's like, oh, here's the witch. That's okay, go ahead. What are you going to say? So I said, well, cayenne, is used traditionally where I'm from. Like, we use hot peppers, bird peppers or habaneros, and they make a paste. They'll put it in water and you'll drink it for like a set amount of days. And then it starts to bring the blood pressure down. And he's like, I've never heard of anything crazier. Oh. Now, fast forward 3 months later, there's an article in the, like a medical review journal, right? Like one of these, and it says capsicum, which is cayenne, right? The active ingredient in peppers, should be given to triple bypass patients. The tablets should be given to them because it will help vasodilation, like open the blood vessels. And that way the pressure of the blood is like going down because it's not pressing so hard against something so tight. Mm-hmm. And I took him this article. I was so excited. Imagine, I'm just a little young student. I'm so excited. I'm taking him the art. I'm like, oh my God, look at this. Isn't this amazing? I wasn't even trying to be funny. Yeah. He took the paper, he took the thing, and he's like, it's ridiculous. Wow. He never even read it. And I want to tell you, Dr. Carr, that his office looked like your office. Every issue of that magazine was behind him and on the floor. It was his Bible. It was his Bible. He may not have had that issue, but it was in something he respected.
So, but he still tossed it.
Because it was too much for his consciousness to take in, that something that was dietary and that we already knew about could possibly have been of any validation, like could be validated. Get out of here with that. He literally just threw it. I was like, oh my God.
But that's so crazy, because one of the things, and for those of you who don't know, Dr. Almond talked to our freshman class at Howard last fall, and we were having a conversation as you were leading us through how to decolonize wellness. And you told them a story about your medical school experience and nutrition. Did they teach?
There's no training. I mean, maybe now there's a bit more, but that first year, I didn't have any classes that talked about food at all, which to me is like, well, how is that possible? Look, the thing that people have to do every day pretty much is drink water. And then every few days or so is eat, right? So you have to breathe, you have to drink water, you have to eat. Everything else is a little negotiable. It's on different time frames or whatever. But the fact that we wouldn't ever talk about this was amazing to me. And I think there may be a few more training hours in nutrition, like a class here or there, but even that has to be thought through. How much food, when is it eaten, what is eaten? We can't just put these many milligrams of sodium, this many, but what kind of salt is it? Is it the salt that comes from the ocean that we use when we cook stews in Jamaica, like those very maroon style things where they take a cup of seawater and that's the salt, it's natural? Or is it iodized, white salt, that's from a table salt? Like they're not all equal, right? So we have to question even like those nutritional trainings.
So then one of the things, and it's interesting now that I mentioned this book.
Y'all gotta drink water though.
Oh, wait,
Did you say maroons?
You said maroon.
Oh, my bad.
Just keeping y'all.
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly right. Got to hear. When I was reading Liddell, her book, Walking Over Medicine, she said, here's a professor at Michigan State. They send her to these clinics in Detroit and Lansing, and she's watching the interaction between the doctors and the healthcare professionals and these poor Black and brown folk, primarily, who are coming in, and she's witnessing them not understanding all the medical terms and also being very suspicious of these folk. And so she starts this project where she gets there before they have their appointments, and she waits for them after their appointments. And as she's listening to them, she's getting how they engage wellness in their homes and their communities, and how they don't trust these doctors because they don't think these doctors mean to heal them. They're just pushing this medicine out. I'm saying to ask you this, as you've just laid it out for us in your personal experience and in what you've observed, how much of listening to elders, being in community, how much of that will help us find remedies, and how should we even then view the medical professionals we do go to for the things that we perhaps can't do at home? I mean, how should we even view the whole medical profession complex? Because people going to the doctor every day not trusting what the doctor says.
Yeah, that's a great conversation, and it's a good question. It's very complicated, isn't it? And we see it from the aspect of COVID and, vaccination, not vaccination, like just, we have reasons why we don't trust that stuff, and then at the same time, I've been vaccinated. Like, you got to figure out where you fit, within the aspect. And I will say that, I did a bit of graduate work at Tuskegee, and the conversation is still there about the experiment. The conversation is still, so lo these many years later, and not that it shouldn't be, it's just at the top of our minds because we are used to that behavior. There's a great book. I interviewed these folks some years ago called Body Bazaar, BAZAAR, like a festival or bazaar. And that book was talking about the market for body parts, body cells, stem cell, all of that within people of color. But then also when we talk about that and medical apartheid, the idea that we don't want to hand over our bodies to anyone who doesn't care about us.
How about that?
This goes hand in hand with what you were saying, Dr. Carr, about HBCUs, why they were founded, what they mean today, as opposed to maybe the original foundation of an agricultural and mechanical school or a A&T or the original purposes of a Negro school for normal coloreds or whatever they wanted to call it, right? Which is that a lot of times when we send our children or we've gone to HBCUs, there's a different level of education. There's a different level of concern.
That's right.
I've heard where if you didn't, I've seen where somebody didn't show up to class 3 or 4 times, and the professor came to the dorm and was like, "I need to see what you're doing. What's going on? Are you all right?"
That's right. That's right. That's right.
And you're not going to have that in other places. The same thing kind of applies, right? That's why we typically look for, we have Black undertakers and we have Black dentists and we have Black doctors and we have because we at least want the field to be normalized in that we want to be seen a certain way. And then we can argue about what medicine we don't want to take.
How
right?
about that? That's right. That's right.
So here's the thing. I would never say that somebody shouldn't take whatever they've been prescribed to. The thing is, the doctor has to enter the conversation, just like you're saying, Dr. Carr, this has to be a community effort. So it's like a marriage with one person. It just doesn't work. Like the doctor needs to be in on the joke. They have to know that you want to get off of these blood pressure meds. You want to start eating differently. You want to start exercising differently. You want to do other things to bring your pressure down so then you can get off it. You don't just not take this stuff, because as we've said, we have historic physical and psycho-spiritual traumas that have created this circumstance. Yes. So we're going to have to, as Jamaicans say, when your hand is in the lion's mouth, you take it out slow, right? It's probably very African because we don't have lions. But they
and there were lions in Europe, so it must have been African.
So, Dr. Thank you for Dr. Sunyada. I had my gallbladder removed when I was in my 20s, right? And when it was done, they never told me why it happened to begin with. Why they didn't tell me you were eating too many fatty foods. And then they removed it and didn't tell me that I need to stop eating fatty foods. I'm going to put pressure on my liver. So I went, started reading and cut out all oils and fats and stuff. But why didn't the doctor tell me that?
This is a great story. You know who else this happened to? My father.
Wow.
He was, who actually went, now that I should say this, he went to undergraduate in Cuba. He went to undergrad in pre-med in Cuba and had so many things to say about how great that system was too. But when my dad came back to this country, he was a student who was probably at that point only 21 or so at the end of that university stint in Cuba. And the very same thing happened. He felt sweaty. He was like, what's going on? He fainted. Oh, wait, men don't faint. They pass out in it. They don't faint.
Sensitive.
Don't faint.
No,
yeah, he passed out. My dad from Harlem, he passed out.
Right, he can't faint, right? He's incapable of fainting, right?
He fell out. So he woke up. He was in the hospital. There were doctors surrounding his bed. He's like, what is going on? He's in Harlem Hospital. He woke up. They said, oh, well, we took your bladder out. I mean, your gallbladder out. He's like, what? Can you imagine waking up? It's like a scene out of Get Out, right? You wake up, you're like, I don't have a gallbladder. And he said, well, what happened? Why? And they said, well, I don't know. It got the stone. We decided to take it out. And that's the thing about these teaching hospitals too, right?
No question. I got that book, Ghost of Johns Hopkins, behind me. I mean, I'm not going under the knife.
Nope. Not without more conversation.
No question. He said that's why they call it practicing medicine, sister.
It's a practice.
They're practicing. So what happened? They took his.
He's like, what? So they told him, well, we don't know, but you won't have the problem again because you don't have a gallbladder.
I came here.
He sort of laughed about it a bit. Not him, but they were like, and they walked out. One Indian doctor who was an exchange student, one little Indian guy, he said it was just about this high. He was still there, futzing around with the stuff. And he said, the Indian guy told my dad, I'm never going to repeat this again. And if you say I said this, I'm going to deny it. But we're seeing this problem too in India where people are eating too many fats and it's causing the gallbladder to develop stones. And now that you've had it out, you can't eat those fatty foods anymore. Because my dad's parents are from North Carolina. They were eating all kind of stuff, right? Like lots of, and he was in Harlem. So soul food was king.
My God.
Right. And he that day, my dad decided to become a vegetarian. And that's how I got here, was he opened a shop. As soon as he graduated university, he opened the first of what would become Calabash. He opened the first one 2 doors from the Apollo, like there were 2 doors more, and it was mosque number 7. And it was the perfect storm, the perfect environment at that time of consciousness, of people starting to eat differently and do things differently. That first store was called Black Pyramid. The first 3 stores he had, I guess Pyramid wasn't black enough. I don't know. It wasn't black enough. The Black Pyramid. So the same story. He had no gallbladder. He's like, what's up? And I will tell you this, my dad is now in his 80s. He's never spent one day other than that day in the hospital. No medications, nothing. He goes and plays tennis every day, plays tennis. Like you would never know that this was an 80-something-year-old man. And that just goes to show you that, that what I was saying about making your mind up, that made his mind up for him. It took that crisis. And he used to say to me that pain is a heck of a motivator. It'll pull you to some other places.
No question.
So the sugar we need to get off of, and you can wean yourself off of sugar and not replace it with equal or whatever other chemical, honey, like what is, what's a replacement for sugar? And can people get completely off of sugar?
I really like agave. I like, certain grades of agave as a sweetener, as a bridge sweetener for people, because it has a lower glycemic, index, spiker. I like fruits as sugars. I think that what happened is we just need to modulate our taste a little bit. And that's what we talk about with decolonizing wellness and decolonizing our tongues, is we got so used to what colonizers wanted to eat that it became the norm. That sweet tea, the lemon cake, and you and I both know when you taste those things, your teeth hurt. You're like, whoa, it make my teeth hurt. Like, it's just too sweet. Your own body is saying, I don't want to eat this.
So white rice, what are the things as people are burning down their fields, what should they be taking out and putting in the fire?
I love I love the idea of like white potatoes, white flour, white sugar. Even in Jamaica, we talked about this the other day in another session that we have a 9-night celebration, which is like our funeral rites. And we also have that like as a festival. And a lot of times if you have funeral rites or you have like 9-night, the white rice that's just white will be called duppy rice. This is like ghost rice. Like, this is not for the people. It's just
this is for the undead. This is for the zombie.
So imagine that even in Jamaica, like when I was a kid, I remember if we were going over to Jamaica from New York, that people would ask us to bring domino sugar, like to ask us to bring white, like big. These things are heavy, like a 5-pound. We had to bring like 25-pound or pack a barrel and send it. And I'm like, but you're in the land of sugar.
The sugar named for the Dominican. You could go next door and get the cane. They send it to Baltimore for processing, and you want me to bring it back for me?
That's crazy. And here's the part. Here's the part is that sugar is the one we can replace the white sugar with, the one that's brown, the turbinado, as they call it, like the large crystals that are brown, that are raw, the raw sugar. You find you won't need much. It's not nearly as sweet as the bleached white sugar. And you can start modulating backwards, a little less, a little less, a little less, and pull the flavor of whatever you're eating more forward. The idea that we would ask for sugar, I mean, imagine the colonization of asking for sugar in a place where we make sugar, and it's the terrible sugar.
Actually, this is a good point. You've told me this before, and I've heard you tell just countless numbers of people that we should think in terms of eating the color wheel.
Eat the rainbow, eat the whole rainbow.
The rainbow.
When Professor Under was saying that her dad didn't have anything green on the plate, whatever, like we want yellow and green and we want purple and blue, just the Roy G. Biv on the plate. And even if it's not at that very moment during the day, it's just great. Like, just have a handful of blueberries, like eat some blackberries, have some avocado, whatever. Like, just think in terms of color. Like, did I eat all the colors of the rainbow? And not Skittles. I'm not talking about Skittles. Like, actually eating the fruit and vegetables.
Natural colors, right? I mean, that's funny you say it, because even in thinking in terms of how our ways of knowing, it isn't just what goes in your mouth, the aesthetic, the meaning, the culture. I mean, so where do white foods fit, if at all? I'm saying whiteness isn't just a product of being processed, right? Or are there?
Well, I mean, let's just think about it. Like, when you go and you look in a produce section, how many things are white?
See this.
I mean, I can't think. I'm legitimately thinking with you. We're here together. I can't think of many things that are white.
Because even a potato is not white.
Maybe like eggplants. Like I've seen them grow in Jamaica. Like they're white and they're round. That's why they call them garden egg where we're from. So like besides. But usually they're dark purple, like they're really black. And if somebody has black and very beautiful skin, you say they look like an eggplant. It's awesome.
That's true. This is very. I mean, you drop it straight.
Many white foods, even things you think of as white, like the cassavas, like that when you cut them and then they're white, they're not white inside. They're really quite beige. And if you let it sit there and you turn around and you turn back, it's brown.
Wow.
couple of things. Caffeine, somebody wanted to know. And is caffeine good? Because I love the green tea and you got me hooked on the matcha. Thank you. The matcha and the maca, I started adding a little bit of maca to my matcha.
Switch me out.
That's my everyday. If I don't have that, I have mandingo chai. That's my other one. Or we have a tea called uppity. And the uppity, I love that one because it's a nice lift and it's lemon and ginger, which is astringent, which is like a nice cleanser. I like that a lot too. I will say this, that I'm a huge fan of caffeine. Look, my great grandmother, who was my healing teacher, she was a master herbalist, and she was my teacher. She came from Cuba originally and over to Jamaica, and she was the village healer of her village. She used to say to me that every single thing you eat is a medicine or a poison. You take your choice every time you eat. There's no neutral food. Even water is not neutral. And this is part of that concept of those sets of people that she's from, which are maroon people. All right, hold on. So maroon people is that every single thing that's in your pot, much like you mentioned, Dr. Carr, about eating the rainbow, everything you're putting in, every spice, every seasoning, every herb, every grater of something, whether it's coconut, whatever's in there, has a purpose, has an absolute purpose. I know that Jamaicans get a lot of heat for putting ginger in everything. We'll put ginger on, I'll put ginger on you. If you stand still long enough, I'll just, like ginger, but I will say that that's because we've retained a lot of our African and indigenous Carib ways of healing. And so even if we're making rice, there's a little, you may not even taste it, but we don't want you to be gassy if you're eating beans. You know, it's just impolite, right? So, we're always thinking of that food. And the same thing applies to caffeine. Jamaica grows some of the world's most expensive coffee, 60 bucks a pound for Blue Mountain coffee. The Japanese buy it before it's even picked. They prepay for 90% of the coffee on the island. That's how much they love it. And what I will say is that in the morning, you may have cocoa tea, we call it, like the cacao pod, you know, made into what maybe we'll call hot chocolate, but it's very thin, it's different. And we may have a little bit of coffee or some tea or whatever the case is. But here's the thing, it's not a venti. It's not this big. It's not all day. It's not, you had it this morning, move on in your life. Use that energy. It's the start of the engine. You started it already and you're driving. You don't need to, you know, when you try to keep starting the engine and
no question.
So that's what happens is the engine's getting overstarted and then it burns. So what we want to do is make sure that we are just dialing the right amount of energy in on a daily basis. And if any of us has one little bit of caffeine and then the rest of the day none, and you get a banging headache, you're addicted. And it's time for us to start talking about how to like detox out of that and just get the nerves under control, because I guarantee you that person's not sleeping well either.
So if you're you know, you have a headache, you're jittery, your kidneys are having problems, you're drinking too much caffeine. You just need to okay.
Yeah, skin is dry.
Look at her smiling. Hey, you know, you got me hooked. Y'all got me hooked on that Harriet's gun.
Oh, that's my tea. Yeah.
What's the 5 pound? I just ordered the biggest bag of it.
Are we addicts, Professor Hunter? Help us, Dr. Amin.
Is it an addiction?
Have we replaced it, or are we now right? You got us strung out on that.
You're good. See, here's the thing too. When we talked about the resonance of what we're eating, the color of what we're eating, the name, what we're calling it, all of that, there's so many traditional African words that still remain throughout the South, all the way in Louisiana, in South Carolina, and North Carolina, like down in your neck of the woods, going down into those beautiful areas in Tennessee and et cetera. These are our African legacies. When we say gumbo, or we say okra, or we say, you know, these are all of our foods. In Jamaica, we have dukono, which is of course the same in Ghana. Like all of our traditions that dictate when we eat something and also what it's called. Like our affection for it is because also it's referred to the way that our Ancestors love this thing, and that's the way we love people, is we feed them. I saw a meme the other day about Black mothers, like if they're sorry, there's no real apology. They just offer you food. They're like, "You hungry?" It's like, that's how we apologize. It's true a lot of times. I've done it myself. And showing love that way, like feeding the people, nourishing them, is the way that we interact, because we understand the control that food has. That has been our experience in the Americas, is that we've been controlled because of someone else's taste for food. So where we can exercise our own desires for food, it is a pleasure for us. Like, that is an extreme pleasure, because we're at least getting to do that for ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And food is not food is a relationship, as you say, which is why, of course, me growing up, like you say, in the South, and just knowing, if particularly for sisters, women in my household, you didn't just eat anybody's food, because that is also
Who made the potato salad? Who made the potato salad? No.
Who made the red sauce?
Yeah. Who made these greens?
Who made these greens? And you
and
did. Oh, go ahead.
No. I mean, you have your favorite auntie that makes a certain dish. You have your favorite, somebody makes the fried chicken better than somebody else, whatever it is, right? Like, we have a way of communicating through that. And whereas food was used as a weapon against us, this is our tool of love. And so in that, let's make sure that we're serving the things that are loving us and the other person. And we're not like, well, it's soul food. I could never understand that movie, that soul food, that long ago movie, but the last part of the movie I didn't understand. The woman had diabetes, she's gotten her legs cut off, they're still eating the same food. I'm like, what is going on here? I think
that you understand it. You're helping us understand how to reverse engineer it, because there's the impact of enslavement. The love is there in terms of our ways of knowing.
Necessary. Dr. Carr, are you willing to go to the stove and cook some things?
I started cooking beans with ginger and onion, and I'm taking my little baby steps. You've helped us all. Believe me, I'm listening. Yeah, no question.
Are you revealing that Dr. Carr eats out a lot?
Oh, I'm not there leaving this place.
What I am revealing is that Dr. Carr has been very loved his whole life, and yes. Black women have loved him, his mother and aunties, and he's been a fix me a plate Negro his whole life.
Well, yeah, but you know what? COVID made me a Negro that would have starved if I continued that. So,
speaking of that, I want us to wind down. And for people who are enjoying this, Dr. will be teaching in narrative. We are working on the schedule and the curriculum, and there's going to be this recipes and lessons on food. And actually started this journey during COVID with Carla Hall, because I saw this program on CBS Sunday Morning about the Madagascar vanilla, and they did it in their right way, and they went there and they showed the people and who was benefiting, who was making billions of dollars. The white folk, and then the Black people are still in the field, and they never said anything about it. And I was like, we taught them how to germinate this vanilla, this vanilla bean that is so expensive, and they're making pennies on a dollar, still harvesting it. So that started this journey on food. So you're going to pick up that baton, and we're going to run with it in narrative. So y'all up for it. But I can't let you go without asking you about COVID. And the vaccine. And you said on my show, everybody here is vaccinated, and we'll deal with it on the other side, because we got to live in this world. What is dealing with the side effects, or some people having adverse reactions? Are there ways that we can help ourselves through this pandemic, those of us who are vaccinated and people who are not vaccinated?
Those are great questions. It's definitely a personal choice. And as we laid out here, there are a wide variety of reasons that all distill down to the same thing, which is at the heart of our distrust of the government, our distrust of the medical institution, which is just an arm of the government. It's understandable. We all have to make those choices for ourselves. The tricky part is that the choices we make because we're in community affect other people. So one of the things is this: we must be true to our word. So if we're saying as a community, we're going to get better. We're going to improve our immune systems. We're going to do better. Then we have to actually do that. You can't say, okay, I'm not taking a vaccine. That's crazy. And I won't, but you'll eat at Popeyes. Like, you have to make a choice. You have to make a choice. If you've seen the movie Food Inc. or Knives Over Forks Over Knives or any of that, like, you understand that it's the same industry, right? Like, this is the same big pharma that makes the stuff smell so good, that brings you into the fried chicken place, and you're like, ooh, it smells great. They're pumping that stuff through the ventilation system, and they're putting stuff in. You can't have it both ways. Either you're concerned about your health and chemicals and things that you don't know, or you're, so we just have to be clear. Let's be clear.
Let's be clear. It's so funny you said that. I'm thinking about Route 1. I never forget, this was 20, 25 years ago. I read an article, maybe it was Harper's or the New Yorker, where they talked about all the chemicals that are manufactured along Route 1 between like Princeton and New Brunswick, Johnston, Johnson. People think they're eating food, but it's really red dye number 2 and a certain scent that comes with it and a taste, and it's all chemicals. So you said you Popeyes, it's not flesh you're eating, it smells and taste, and all that stuff comes out of laboratories. That couldn't be true, Dr. Ahmed.
It's true. And here's the thing. As we take this adventure that Professor Hunter so brilliantly said, that this is about community, and we're moving into those spaces as we post things. I was up all late last night putting together recipes for our community here, because I was just so inspired by Dr. Hunter just talking about this stuff. Yeah. And one of the things that occurred to me is that in the process of this, we must rely on each other. That's why, like, joining narratives, being on there, getting information, making sure that we get off of that rabbit hole that takes us into those spaces. Because here's the funniest part. Here's the trick that the devil played, is that meat, let's just use that as an example, or you talk about chicken, like going out to eat these, Kentucky Fried, whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. Doesn't taste like anything. If you boil that chicken or whatever, it would turn your entire stomach. It's the onions, it's the garlic, it's the spices, it's the plants that make it taste like it does. Wow. And so all we have to do is just refocus those flavors that we love into things that are healthier versions. And like, look, I grew up in New York. I know that Route 1, you come through New Jersey, it's nothing but smokestacks, and all of that stuff is going in the food. It's amazing.
My God. So you dropped so many jewels. Use the plants, since it's the plants that's making the meat taste in the first place.
Eat the plant. Skip the middleman. Just eat the
plant. That's bars right there. Among
and everyone, go to calabashtea.com. Calabash Tea will drop the link in they got every kind of tea and amazing. I just also bought I shouldn't even get into it. I spent a lot of money. You will spend a lot of money, but it's important that we like you said, be impeccable with our word to ourselves and to our community. Yeah. If you're about this life, you can't have one foot over here and one foot over there and expect success. Absolutely. And you're putting everybody at jeopardy by making bad choices or lying about your actual health. You're infecting other people, and that's important. Also, after we take the vaccine, those of us who are vaccinated, are there things that we can do to keep our immune system boosted, or is it just a normal immune boosting thing, the thing that we should be doing anyway?
Of course, there are lots of herbs that are specific and we've used for centuries to help our immune systems. Imagine that even as Maroon people, and then as people who were stolen from other places, right? West Africa, Central Africa, etc. There were lots of germs, right? There were lots of infectious possibilities that we had never been exposed to before. And that's one of the things that wiped out so many Carib native people, was the syphilis, the other germs and bacteria that came in with the conquerors that came there, right? With the colonizers. So we already started to understand what we needed to do in order to survive. Yes, we have great immune systems generally because of all that, and we are the descendants of those people. But we also have access to those things. We do lots of teas at Calabash that are based in those formulas. I would say the first thing to do is stop putting garbage in. Like your body's not going to be able to fight. It's already fighting like 2-3 battles. Like give it less things to have to do. So the red dye number 3 and the number 2 and the sodium in the can and the this and that, like give it less jobs and then it will start to do the job it's supposed to do. But it's overworked is usually the problem.
Medicine or poison, ain't what your great grandmother said?
One or the other.
One or there's no neutral.
No neutral.
Wow.
I think the ancestors will be proud today. I know people have a billion more questions. My goal was to be a narrative, and we're going to share the link, and then people could pop in. Had this grand vision, didn't work out the way I wanted it to, but this is the beginning.
It worked out perfectly.
I know. That's what I'm going to say. It happened how it was supposed to happen, and all the questions you have will be answered because Dr. Sunyada is putting together an amazing curriculum for us to really heal. And I think we picked up the baton today that W.E.B. Dubois dropped. He didn't drop it, he didn't get a chance to finish it, but that's our job, is to finish what our ancestors started, which is why we're here. So I'm humbled and honored and so grateful. Ray has just texted me, said you're putting together something like Hogsworth with the number of folks that are coming in to teach. It's like Harry Potter.
Oh no, seriously.
Yeah.
No. Actually, Hogwarts would be not, because that's just some old recent poop, but kind of recent stuff.
What's the African version of it?
We're in Timbuktu. We're new Timbuktu.
Exactly.
New Timbuktu.
Exactly. There it is.
Better than the Avengers. And I want to thank you, Carr, because you're the key.
Oh, no.
You're the man.
Actually, let's go back to the Egyptian. They had a place that the Europeans now call Karnak and Luxor, but they were known as Epet Isut. And Dr. Beatty, who you've recruited to do meta nature, everybody can learn this. Epet Isut was a place they gathered for education. Epet Isut translates as the most select of places. Yeah. So that's what university. That's cute, but y'all just came yesterday. Let's go to the most selective places, and we get to select.
Going there, Dr. Carr, I've been there, and going there, seeing glyphs on the walls of people with mortars and pestles grinding herbs and putting things in that. It's like, this is a whole pharmacy. Oh my God. Like you can see that this classroom was for pharmacologic study.
See, Dr. Ahmed, we'll be on here for right. Because when you go, for example, like you said, we've been to Kamambo. We both been to Kamambo. On the wall, they have everything: the surgical instruments, the birthing chair. They say no woman should be laying on her back giving birth. They literally have the birthing chair there. You sit down, and that's what, 4,500 years old. Just that.
Yeah, but it's new. It's new now to medicine, modern medicine.
right.
We're gonna keep remembering.
Yes.
And we're gonna keep this going. And Dr. Amin, let me just say thank you for coming into class today, and thank you for joining Narrative and being a part of the faculty. I need a new word for that, because this is better. This is bigger than faculty. This is more than teacher. What we're doing in here is freeing people.
No question.
People like field trip. Yes, we're going to be taking field trips when everyone's vaccinated. We can try.
Yeah. Which actually should, Professor Hunter, that this is a point as it relates to the vaccine. One of the reasons why I went and did it, in addition to everything else, like Dr. Ahmed is teaching us, at some point you have to confront this for yourself. But when we exist in this social structure, which is capitalist, which is imperialist, and trust, we are already seeing it being rolled out. There are going to be places you're prevented from going if you don't have this card. So just set aside the health for a moment, or at least don't ever set that aside, but think about the additional things, and think about the places in the world where they tested some of these vaccines and now are not giving them access.
Right. And
think about the fact that, so we want to go to the Caribbean, we want to go to the continent, we want to go to Latin America. Think about the fact that people are being left out there vulnerable. While we're here right now, finally, what we're seeing in India right now. India is facing a tsunami of this virus, and it's not being covered in the United States in the news. But understand, we live in the world, and COVID doesn't know the difference between skin color or where you grew up or how much money you had.
Borders. There are no borders.
Borders. That's right. That's exactly right. There are no borders. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. So as we're talking about opening back up, no, we're not gonna be opening back up. If we're not very careful, there's gonna be another shutdown and close. So
yeah, it's absolutely true. Like at Calabash, we're not open right now for front-facing service, and it's irritating to our customers. But it's because we love them. We're like, look, we'll send you something in the mail. Don't worry, we got you. But right now, let's be smart as community. Let's just all pull in the same direction. We'll get together again soon. We're good.
No question. No question. And there'll be a we to do it. That's exactly right.
Yes. Yes. We need all hands on deck. Let me just say thank you again to both of you. We're going to see each other. I'll see you all next week. I'm going to be talking with you, Dr. Sunyada, to start this series, as well as next week. And Dr. Carr, we're going to be tackling John Brown in narrative and the things you should know. Again, the Pyramid of Giza took 20 years to build. I'm here for it. And now we have a 50-year plan to fix all that's wrong with Black America. But it starts with the we, right? So,
and thank you, Professor Hunter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Love y'all.
See y'all next week.
I love you guys.